Hello, welcome to my channel again. I am reading The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. This is not something that I picked and decided to read. This was something that happened to me. I've been teaching 10th grade, co-teaching at a school, and 10th grade here in Norway is actually a part of the junior high school system, because in Norway they have 13 years. So kids go to junior high 8th, 9th, and 10th grade, and then they have high school 11th, 12th, and 13th grade. They have a variety of different subjects that they take, which could very well make up for this extra year that they have. They have classes that are there to give the kids life skills, learning how to cook, learning how to organize. And it's this is just one class that I can think of. They also have field trips that are educational, and these field trips can last up to a week. So there are a lot of different aspects of the school system in Norway that differs from the one in America, in Brazil, in Australia, in other countries. But it is, like I said, a very interesting experience for any teacher. And some people say, oh, but you're just a teacher. You studied so much and you're just a teacher. No, I would say I am a teacher, and I'm proud of it. There's nothing wrong with being proud of being who you are and of the qualities that you do have. I suck at math. I suck at a lot of things, like physical activities such as sports. But I have always been great at public speaking, and I've always been great at languages and literature, so I embrace these two things. It's all I have. And as much as people might want to take it away from you, you have to embrace the qualities that you have and go with them. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, Chapter 8. I don't like the lighting in this room because it makes me look a bit weird. There's like a bit of a shadow in this part of my face. I don't think I look good at all, but who cares? It's not about how I look, is it? Chapter 8. Right, grandmother stormed out. The two people Bruno missed the most of all from home were grandfather and grandmother. They lived together in a small flat near the fruit and vegetable stalls, and around the time that Bruno moved out to Outwith, grandfather was almost 73 years old, which, as far as Bruno was concerned, made him just about the oldest man in the world. One afternoon, Bruno had calculated that if he lived his entire life over and over again 8 times, he would still be a little bit younger than grandfather. Grandfather had spent his entire life running a restaurant in the center of town, and one of his employees was the father of Bruno's friend Martin, who worked there as a chef. Although grandfather no longer cooked or waited on tables in the restaurant himself, he spent most of his days there, sitting at the bar in the afternoon, talking to the customers, eating his meals there in the evening, and staying until closing time, and laughing with his friends. Grandmother never seemed old in comparison to the other boys' grandmothers. In fact, when Bruno learned just how old she was, 62, he was amazed. She had met grandfather as a young woman after one of her concerts, and somehow he had persuaded her to marry him, despite all his flaws. She had long red hair, surprisingly similar to her daughter-in-law's, and green eyes, and she claimed that that was because somewhere in her family there was Irish blood. Bruno always knew when a family party was getting into full swing because grandmother would hover by the piano until someone sat down in it and asked her to sing. "What's that?" she always cried, holding a hand to her chest, as if the very idea took her breath away. "Is it a song you're wanting? Why, I couldn't possibly. I'm afraid, young man, my singing days are far behind me." "Sing, sing!" everyone at the party would cry, and after a suitable pause, sometimes as long as 10 or 12 seconds, she would finally give in and turn to the young man at the piano and say it in a quick and humorous voice, "La vie en rose." E flat minor. I don't speak French, so I may have botched the pronunciation for that. And try to keep up with the changes. Parties at Bruno's house were always dominated by grandmother singing, which for some reason always seemed to coincide with the moment when mother moved from the main party area to the kitchen, followed by some of her own friends. Father always used to stay and listen, and Bruno did too, because there was nothing he liked more than hearing grandmother break into her full voice and soak up the applause of the guests at the end. Plus La Vie en Rose gave him chills and made the tiny hairs at the back of his neck stand on end, like getting the goosebumps. Grandmother liked to think that Bruno or Gretel would follow her onto the stage, and every Christmas and at every birthday party she would devise a small play for the three of them to perform for mother, father, and grandfather. She wrote the plays herself, and to Bruno's way of thinking always gave herself the best lines, though he didn't mind that very much. There was usually a song in there somewhere too. "Is it a song you're wanting?" she'd ask first. And an opportunity for Bruno to do a magic trick and for Gretel to dance. The one of the great poets, words which he found very hard to understand. Okay, I'm gonna go back a few lines. I don't like reading stuff on PDF, I'm gonna be honest. I like picking up a book and touching the pages. And if my father had been alive, I would be telling him everything that he predicted was in fact right. My father was an electrical engineer who predicted things such as Skype and Uvu and WhatsApp. What else is there? Instagram, all of those things before there even was anything like that. And I remember him telling me in 1995 or 96, he said to me, "Here, learn how to use email, because you will never write a letter again once you learn how to use this on the computer." And I said, "No, I don't want to. I love writing letters." And he taught me how to use email. And he also had something hooked up to the computer, which was an answering machine, and the computer was on all day. And then when the phone rang, and if we didn't pick up, it would go straight to the computer. And there was an answering machine that was hooked up to the computer. He had a lot of interesting things going, and if I told him that I'm actually reading books on PDF on the computer and reading books on my phone and talk to him about Kindle and all these things, he died 11 years ago, and he didn't see a lot of these things, and sometimes I wish he were here to see it. But I do still like to hold a book in my hands. I ordered a copy of The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas from cdon.com, cdon.no. Still not here. Cdon, shape up. So when I read in PDF, I have to keep clicking pages to go up and down, and sometimes looking straight at the screen, I may miss a few lines. So let's go back. There was usually a song in there somewhere too. "Is it a song you're wanting?" she'd ask first, and an opportunity for Bruno to do a magic trick for Gretel to dance. The play always ended with Bruno reciting a long poem by one of the great poets, words which he found very hard to understand, but which somehow started to sound more and more beautiful the more he read them. But that wasn't the best part of these little productions. The best part was the fact that grandmother made costumes for Bruno and Gretel. Page down. She made costumes for Bruno and Gretel. No matter what the role, no matter how few lines he might have in comparison to his sister or grandmother, Bruno always got to dress up as a prince or an Arab sheikh, or even on one occasion as a Roman gladiator. There were crowns, and when there weren't crowns, there were spears. And when there weren't spears, there were whips or turbans. No one ever knew what grandmother would come up with next, but a week before Christmas, Bruno and Gretel would be summoned to her home on a daily basis for rehearsals. Of course, the last play they performed had ended in a disaster, and Bruno still remembered it with sadness, although he wasn't quite sure what had happened to cause the argument. The argument. A week or so before, there had been great excitement in the house, and it had something to do with the fact that father was now to be addressed as Commandant. I wonder how this would be best pronounced. I think that because the atmosphere is so German, when you read this out loud, having either a slight German accent or some sort of a British German accent, or saying the words in a way that they would be German sounding almost. Commandant. Commandant. The atmosphere is all there. I believe in the past chapter, a lot of the references, for instance, head, instead of calling him Mr. Head, as in Mr. in German. So the words in German that are thrown in, these are references that really tie the story to its real roots, because the story is supposed to be taking place in Germany, although the book is being written in English. Maria, cook, and Lars, the butler. These are characters. Maria is a character that is in the movie. She's described in the book physically in a different way from the actress that actually plays Maria. And I mentioned before in the prior analysis, I mentioned that a lot of the changes in the script are due to the fact that the language of cinema has to be one that speaks to you visually, whereas when you pick up a book to read, the words will tell a story and you form an image in your head. So the words, the details, the descriptions are really important. One of the things that I like to say is, and I wish I hadn't seen the book before I started reading, seen the movie before I started reading the book, is that I like to form my own image of what the characters look like. I like to read the book without ever seeing whatever screen version of it, so that I can read the descriptions and form an image in my head, which is the point. And but I did see the movie before reading the book, so I already have, like, I try not to picture Bruno as the actor who played him in the movie, but sometimes it's really hard. But these characters here, Maria, cook, and Lars, the butler, these characters, and then when you think of how they're presented in the movie, some of them have no lines, whereas in the book they have lines. Some of them are just a part of the background, and their mere presence is what matters to a particular scene, but when you read the book you get more detail. So basically my pitch here is to get people to read. That's my pitch. Read and watch the movie. Don't just think that one thing substitutes the other. Commandant. Father was to be called Commandant. This is bringing the army into the home. Is bringing his role in the workplace, his role in the world into the home. Often enough, you'll have like a father who is a policeman, a father who exercises any profession really, but in the home, he's just daddy, he's just father. But here, he's bringing the role into the home. And that's when the lines blur, and perhaps this is a side of him that the family doesn't want, doesn't like. There had been nothing but excitement for weeks. First the Fury and the beautiful blonde woman that had come to dinner. Who is the Fury, really? Who is the Fury? Who is that? I don't want to give too much away with these videos that I'm making, because I don't want these videos to be like cliff notes. Oh, we don't need to read the book, we've already seen what Pollyanna had to say about it. These videos are my impressions and literary analysis without my opinion on it. I'm just giving the cold facts. The prior videos where I talked about the narrative, what type of characters, and how the story is being told from the point of view of a removed, omniscient narrator. These are cold facts, just like when you dissect a cadaver, right? Dissect a cadaver, it's all there. A heart, a liver, the skeleton, everything is there, just as the narrative will be the same for everyone reading. I won't put too much of my opinion into this, but I will tell little anecdotes and things, just so the video isn't too boring and the 10-12 people that will watch it won't fall asleep. But here, what we have, the Fury. I don't want to give too much away. Who is the Fury? That's a question I'm posing to the audience. Who is that? If you know a little bit of history, you might know who that is. Mother had told Bruno to congratulate father, and he had done so. Although, if he was honest with himself, which he always tried to be, he wasn't entirely sure what he was congratulating him for. And this, again, if he was honest with himself. There is a voice in here, which is the voice, Bruno's inner voice. Often enough, people will have their idiosyncrasies, their peculiarities, things that they do which make them who they are. Bruno has, and up to this point this has been seen several times, he has a habit of really having these interior monologues where he tries to be honest with himself, to know exactly what the reality around him is. And at the beginning of the novel, he starts to wonder what his father does for a living in one of the beginning chapters. And then there is a part, I think a big chunk of text, that talks about how if he were honest with himself, he really didn't know what his father did. And here again, he didn't know why he was congratulating his father. But there is all the traditions in the family. There are all the traditions in the family. There are all the different things that the kids are expected to do. And they're obedient, of course, and they do what the family asks them to do. So they just do things without really thinking too much about it. But his interior voice, his interior monologue, we can read it and we know how he's feeling. On Christmas Day, father wore his brand new uniform. the starched and pressed one that he wore every day now, and the whole family applauded when he first appeared in it. It really was something special compared to the other soldiers who came in and out of the house. He stood out, and they seemed to respect him all the more now that he had it. The importance of the uniform. What does the uniform represent? It's like a ranking, right? A rank. Certain uniforms represent that you're a lieutenant or a colonel or someone. You look at your clothes as a soldier and you know what kind of soldier you are. Are you in an authority position? Are you lower in a rank? So the uniform represents something. So it was not just, oh, the uniform looks good, so we respect him more. But it's what the uniform represents. Compared to the other soldiers who came in and out of the house, he stood out, and they seemed to respect him all the more now that he had it. Mother went up to him and kissed him on the cheek and ran a hand across the front of it, commenting on how fine she thought the fabric was. Bruno was particularly impressed by all the decorations on the uniform, and he had been allowed to wear the cap for a short period, provided his hands were clean when he put it on. These little details remind us that Bruno is a kid. You can wear the cap, but your hands must be clean. Go wash your hands. It's a small detail, but it tells us, the readers, that that's a kid. That's somebody, they let him do certain things, but there are limitations to what he can do. Grandfather was very proud of his son when he saw him in his new uniform, but grandmother was the only one who seemed unimpressed. After dinner had been served, and after she and Gretel and Bruno had performed the latest production, she sat down sadly in one of the armchairs and looked at father, shaking her head as if he were a huge disappointment to her. "I wonder, is this where I went wrong with you, Ralph?" she said. "I wonder if all the performances I made you give as a boy led you to this, dressing up like a puppet on a string." What is this metaphor here? What is a metaphor? A metaphor is a comparison. It is a literary recourse. Let us just put this into layman terms. A literary recourse. It is something used in literature, used in books, and used in not only novels but in short stories and poems. A metaphor is a comparison. Dressing up like a puppet on a string. So grandmother is comparing her son to a puppet on a string. What is a puppet on a string? Let us think about this for a moment. A puppet on a string. There is a string, and somebody is controlling the puppet. The puppet is dressed up. The puppet will do whatever whoever is controlling the puppet. That person is the one controlling the puppet, so whatever that person wants the puppet to do, it will do. Who's controlling father here? He is Commandant, right? Commandant. Commandant. He is in a position of authority, but there is somebody who is way above him. Who is that? Who is the one calling the shots here? So he's like a puppet on a string. This comparison is a metaphor. "Now, mother," said father in a tolerant voice, this isn't the time. Standing there in your uniform," she continued, "as if it makes you something special, not even caring what it means really, what it stands for." "Natalie, we discussed this in advance," said grandfather, "so now we know that grandmother's name is Natalie." Grandfather, although everyone knew that when grandmother had something to say, she always found a way to say it, no matter how unpopular it might prove to be. "You discussed it, Matthias," said grandmother. "I was merely the blank wall to whom you would address your words as usual." Again, she's using another metaphor, a comparison. She's comparing herself to a blank wall. Think about a blank wall. Sometimes there are situations in which you talk and you don't feel like you're being listened to, or you are just saying something without the expectation of a reply, or you don't get a reply, so you will say something like, "This is like talking to a wall." So she's comparing herself to a wall, meaning that she doesn't feel like her opinion is valued, that the words are just thrown at her. So this metaphor here, this comparison, comparing herself to a wall, a blank wall, a wall that has no say in it. Grandmother had something to say, and she would say it. "This is a party, Mother," said Father with a sigh. "And it's Christmas. Let's not spoil things." "I remember when the Great War began," said Grandfather proudly, staring into the fire and shaking his head. "I remember you coming home to tell us how you had joined up, and I was sure that you would come to harm." "He did come to harm, Matthias," insisted Grandmother. "Take a look at him for your evidence." So she looks at him in his uniform, and notice that the words Nazi or all of the words are surrounding. I don't want to say too much and spoil it, but let us just say this word, Nazi. The word Nazi hasn't been said. But we know by now he is a Nazi. Of course, when you watch the motion picture, you see the uniform with the swastika and everything, so you already know all of this. And that symbol, the swastika, speaks for itself. You look at it, you already know. But here we don't see a lot. We just have the images brought to us, and also there is a lot of inferences that we make based on the historical period, based on the information that we have been given so far. So this is what she believes is the evidence that he's being harmed. So she's not somebody who supports the Nazi values. "And now look at you," continued Grandfather, ignoring her. "It makes me so proud to see you elevated to such a responsible position." Grandfather, on the other hand, might be in favor of the war and what the war stands for. Helping your country reclaim her pride after all the great wrongs that were done to her. The punishments above and beyond. "Oh, will you listen to yourself?" cried Grandmother. "Which one of you is the most foolish, I wonder?" "But Natalie," said Mother, trying to calm the situation down a little, "don't you think Ralph looks very handsome in his uniform?" "Handsome?" asked Grandmother, leaning forward and staring at her daughter-in-law as if she had lost her reason. "Handsome, did you say? You foolish girl. Is that what you consider to be of importance in the world, looking handsome?" "Do I look handsome in my ringmaster's costume?" asked Bruno. For that was what he had been wearing for the party tonight, the red and black outfit of a circus ringmaster. And he had been very proud of himself in it. The moment he spoke, he regretted it, however, for all the adults looked in his and Gretel's direction as if they had forgotten that they were there at all. "Children, upstairs," said Mother quickly. "Go to your rooms." "But we don't want to," protested Gretel. "Can we play down here?" "No, children," she insisted. "Go upstairs and close the door behind you. That's all you soldiers are interested in anyway," Grandmother said, ignoring the children altogether. "Looking handsome in your fine uniforms, dressing up and doing the terrible, terrible things you do. It makes me ashamed, but I blame myself, Ralph, not you." "Children, upstairs now," said Mother, clapping her hands together, and this time they had no choice but to stand up and obey her. But rather than going straight to their rooms, they closed the door and sat at the top of the stairs trying to hear what was being said by the grown-ups down below. However, Mother and Father's voices were muffled and hard to make out. Grandfather's was not to be heard at all, while Grandmother's was surprisingly slurred. Finally, after a few minutes, the door slammed open, and Gretel and Bruno darted back up the stairs, while Grandmother retrieved her coat from the rack in the hallway. "Ashamed," she called out before she left, "that a son of mine should be—" She doesn't finish the sentence. "A patriot," cried Father. So, how would that sentence be completed? How would you complete that sentence? That a son of mine should be blank. I'm posing that question and not answering it on purpose. "A patriot," cried Father. He completed it. He didn't let her say it. "Who perhaps have never learned the rule about not interrupting your mother. A patriot, indeed," she cried out. "The people you have to dinner in this house. It makes me sick." So who came to dinner? The Fury. Who's the Fury? Let's not say it. Let's just think about it. "And to see you in that uniform makes me want to tear the eyes from my head." This is a hyperbole, or some people say a hyperbole. Pronunciation. I'm going to change the screen into something else. Ta-da! Let's change the screen into something else. Here we go. Full screen. Here you see the PDF that I'm reading. And now, Microsoft Word. Here we go. So now I'm going to write this down. And I'm going to write it in very big letters to make sure that it can be read. New document. 72. So what is this word? It is another literary recourse. Hyperbole or hyperbole. Hyperbole. I'm gonna go to a site that I really like. It's called howjusay.com. It pronounces the words for you. There are different ways to pronounce words. I'm gonna say hyperbole or hyperbole, one of the two, but it could be something completely different.
Hyperbole.
Hyperbole. Hyperbole. It is a figure of speech.
Hyperbole.
It is a literary recourse. And what am I talking about here? When grandmother says, "It makes me sick, and to see you in that uniform makes me want to tear the eyes from my head," she's not literally going to do it, is she? She's exaggerating. She's saying something drastic. She's exaggerating in order to make a point. And that's what a hyperbole is. Some people say hyperbole, some people say hyperbole. As long as people understand that a hyperbole is actually a figure of speech that describes something with exaggeration. You exaggerate a concept in order to make a point. This video has been going on for 34 minutes. I got carried away, so I'm just going to finish the chapter since I'm only a few words away from finishing it. And I'm going to wrap this up. "A patriot," cried Father, who perhaps had never learned the rule about not interrupting your mother. "A patriot indeed," she cried out. "The people you have to dinner in this house, why, it makes me sick. and to see you in that uniform makes me want to tear the eyes from my head," she added before storming out of the house and slamming the door behind her. Bruno hadn't seen much of grandmother after that, and hadn't even had a chance to say goodbye to her before they moved to Outwith. But he missed her very much, and decided to write her a letter. That day he sat down with a pen and paper, and told her how unhappy he was there, and how much he wished he was back home in Berlin. He told her about the house, and the garden, and the bench with a clock on it, and the tall fence, and the wooden telegraph poles, and the barbed wire bales, and the hard ground beyond them, and the huts, and the small buildings, and the smoke stacks, and the soldiers. But mostly he told her about the people living there, in their striped pajamas and cloth caps. And then he told her how much he missed her. And he signed off his letter, "Your loving grandson, Bruno." And this was the end of chapter 8. Even with all my ramblings, it took 36 minutes only to read it. I'm wrapping this up.